Maya had always taken the late train home without much thought. The city at midnight felt tired more than dangerous. Its streets washed in amber streetlights and a distant hum of traffic. She worked long shifts at the hospital cafeteria. And by the time she stepped off the train each night, the platforms were nearly empty except for exhausted workers and drifting strangers. That evening in November, cold rain clung to her coat as she walked beneath the flickering lights toward the alley shortcut she had used hundreds of times before. Her headphones were in her pocket instead of over her ears. Not because she sensed danger, but because fatigue had sharpened her awareness in strange ways. Every footstep echoed louder than usual. Every shadow looked stretched and unfamiliar. Halfway down the alley, she heard someone behind her. At first it sounded harmless, just another person walking. The same route, but the footsteps matched her pace too perfectly. When she slowed, they slowed. When she quickened her stride, the sound grew faster too. Maya turned her head slightly and caught sight of a man in a dark jacket, his hood pulled low over his face. He wasn't old, maybe mid-30s, broad-shouldered and moving with unsettling confidence. The alley suddenly felt narrower than before, the brick walls rising like barriers instead of buildings. She told herself not to panic. Cities were full of people heading home late at night, but instinct clawed at her chest anyway. "Hey," the man called out. His voice was rough, casual in a way that felt rehearsed. "You got a light?" Maya shook her head without stopping. No, the footsteps accelerated. Before she could reach the end of the alley, a hand seized her arm hard enough to spin her round. Shock ripped through her body so violently she couldn't breathe for a second. The man's grip tightened, fingers digging into her coat sleeve as he shoved her backward against the damp brick wall. Rainwater soaked through her clothes instantly. His face was partly hidden beneath the hood, but his eyes were cold and focused, not wild or drunken as she might have expected. That calmness terrified her more than rage would have. "Don't scream," he muttered. Maya's mind fractured into sharp fragments of thought. Run. Fight. Freeze. Her body chose all three at once. She pushed against his chest, but he outweighed her easily, pinning one of her wrists above her head while the other hand tried to force her closer. Panic surged through her veins so intensely it made her vision blur. She opened her mouth anyway and screamed. The sound tore through the alley, raw and desperate. The man cursed immediately and slammed her shoulder against the wall hard enough to make pain explode down her arm. "Shut up," he hissed, glancing toward the street instead of silencing her. Fear fueled her. Maya kicked wildly, her boot connecting with his shin. He stumbled just enough for her to wrench one hand free. She clawed at his face blindly, nails scraping skin. The man recoiled with a snarl, grabbing for her again, but the brief distance gave her room to move. She darted sideways, slipping on wet pavement and nearly falling. He caught the back of her coat, dragging her backward with brutal force. For one horrifying moment she thought he would overpower her completely. The alley seemed impossibly empty. The city deaf to her cries. Then another voice shouted from the street, "Hey, leave her alone." The attacker froze. A pair of figures appeared at the mouth of the alley to delivery drivers carrying insulated bags, their expressions shifting instantly from confusion to alarm. One of them pulled out a phone while the other started running forward. The men released Maya so abruptly she collapsed onto the pavement. He bolted deeper into the alley instead of toward the street, disappearing into darkness before either witness could reach him. Footsteps pounded away. Fading into the rain-soaked city, Maya could barely process what had happened. Her lungs heaved painfully as one of the drivers crouched beside her, asking if she was hurt, if she could stand, if she wanted an ambulance. The questions blurred together. Her hands shook uncontrollably. and she realized she was still trying to pull her coat tight around herself as though fabric could shield her from what had nearly occurred. She tasted blood where she had bitten the inside of her cheek. The world felt unreal, distant, like she was watching someone else crouched in the rain. Instead of inhabiting her own body, police arrived within minutes, lights washing blue and red across the alley walls. Officers asked for descriptions, timelines, details she struggled to remember. Hooded jacket. Tall. Scratches on his face. Calm voice. She hated how uncertain she sounded, hated that terror had stolen clarity from her memory. An officer wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, while another searched the alley with a flashlight. The rain had already begun erasing footprints. Maya stared at the puddles gathering near the curb and wondered how something so violent could disappear so quickly into an ordinary night at the hospital. Despite working there for years, she felt strangely alien walking through the emergency department as a patient instead of an employee. Nurses photographed bruises forming along her wrists and shoulder. A doctor checked for concussion symptoms where her head had struck the wall. Everyone spoke gently, carefully, but she still felt exposed under the fluorescent lights. Her younger brother Daniel arrived close to dawn, panic etched across his face. When he hugged her, she finally cried out the frantic tears of fear from the alley, but exhausted, shaking sobs that seemed pulled from somewhere much deeper. The days afterward were harder than Maya expected. Fear lingered in ordinary places. She jumped at footsteps behind her. She avoided mirrors because the bruises reminded her how close she had come to something irreversible. Sleep became fractured by nightmares in which the alley stretched endlessly while no one heard her screams. Friends tried to comfort her, though some stumbled awkwardly through conversations, unsure what to say. Others urged her to move on too quickly, as though trauma followed a schedule. Maya learned that surviving an attack was not a clean moment of escape. It was a long, uneven process of reclaiming safety inch by inch. Weeks later, detectives informed her they had found a suspect. Security cameras from nearby businesses had captured fragments of footage, and the scratches on the man's face matched her description when officers questioned him during an unrelated incident. Maya was asked to identify him in a lineup. Sitting behind the glass, she felt her heartbeat hammer against her ribs as each man stepped forward under the sterile room lighting. When Number 4 lifted his head fully, recognition struck instantly. The same cold eyes, the same expressionless calm. Her stomach twisted violently, but her voice remained steady when she identified him. The trial months later forced her to relive the attack repeatedly. Defense attorneys questioned inconsistencies in her memory, dissecting moments blurred by fear and adrenaline. Maya discovered how exhausting it was to prove terror to strangers, yet she endured it anyway. Speaking clearly about the alley, the grip on her arm, the threats, the struggle. The delivery drivers testified to, describing the scene they had interrupted. Surveillance footage filled in gaps her mind could not. By the end, the courtroom felt heavy with silence whenever she spoke. Not because people pitied her, but because the reality of violence sounded stark and ugly when stripped of sensationalism. When the guilty verdict finally came, Maya did not feel triumphant. Relief existed, certainly, but it was quieter than movies suggested. There was no sudden erasure of fear or instant return to normal life. Healing arrived slowly through therapy sessions, support groups, long conversations with people she trusted, and small victories like taking the train again without panic swallowing her whole. She learned that surviving was not defined by one brave moment in an alley. It was defined by every difficult day afterward in which she chose to keep living despite what someone had tried to take from her.